So today we're just going to have a quick little chat about what the role of a strength and conditioning coach actually is for anybody that doesn't know or isn't aware of what we actually do. So I think you're a pretty experienced person to answer that question. So
The role of a strength and conditioning coach. It has many roles, and it's evolving with the industry as well. It's kind of growing larger and larger, and there's a lot of grey area at the moment because there could be many, I guess, different terminologies. People are starting to call themselves different things, but it's all basically the same stuff at this stage. I would say the main role at the moment should be around strength and conditioning, so providing a strength program either for an individual or the team, and then a conditioning based program based on the needs, needs analysis for the sport, same thing for the individual or the team. That should be like the bare minimum role of the strength and conditioning coach. However, if that's all a strength and conditioning coach does, they might find themselves out of work pretty soon. So I guess from what I can see in my experience anyway, if you enter a role with that mentality, you're not going to last very long, and you're going to get super frustrated because they're probably the things that you want to do as a coach, just the strength program and just the conditioning program, but you'll be thrown many other tasks. It's probably, depending on how high ranking you are, either in your private sector gym or in a team environment, will probably depend on how big your role is. So it's probably becoming a little bit more finite and a little bit more niche in the team setting. So you'll tend to find there's like a specific conditioning coach or someone that mainly runs conditioning, and then someone that mainly runs the strength and the power. That's usually how it runs. It depends on what level you're playing as well. You get the jack of all trades that kind of has to run both. In the private sector, you kind of definitely have to have the ability to do both. You can definitely kind of niche yourself, like, we obviously have coaches here that can be running specific, can be strength and power specific, can be, just strength specific. But I think everyone needs to have like a pretty good understanding of like everything. So you can have a deep knowledge on, maybe one thing, but you still need to have a pretty broad knowledge on all the other things. As you kind of go up, you need more diverse skills. So as you're going up the chain into more of like head strength conditioning, or the throw word now is high performance manager.
Everyone wants to be a high performance manager.
Yeah, exactly.
What does that mean?
It's just a high title. It's just whatever. Someone's come up with it and it's kind of stuck. But basically it's the same kind of thing. And it is more of a managerial type role. So you actually, in that role, probably do a lot less of the strength programming and the conditioning programming. You still might have a large say in what goes on, but if you're good at that role, you tend to delegate a lot of that work. So the other role I should mention, which is really important for the future of the industry as well, is the rehab. That's
your rehab coach.
Quickly becoming amalgamated. That rehab coach is super important. So again, like having a strong understanding of strength and conditioning, and then how that would apply to an injured athlete or an injured individual. Again, the physio can have like some of a part, and this is where you're getting the double degrees coming through, which I think is a pretty smart idea. Is to have good strong physio or injury knowledge, and then good strong strength and conditioning knowledge. I think you'll find actually most high performance managers kind of start from that pathway.
Yeah.
They have a bit of both, and they work their way forward. But having said that, it's just because it's not just a time-based thing. Like just because you're a strength and conditioning coach for X amount of time doesn't mean you'll necessarily be a good high performance manager or a head of a program, because the skills can be quite different. So understanding what needs to happen is important, but I'd say the extra skills that you need to throw in, not that you don't need these when you're younger, but it's probably more important as you do become a manager, is like how to manage staff, how to manage supporting roles, so how to talk to a physio, how to talk to the head coach, how to talk to any other kind of medical professional that you might interact with, including exercise physiologists, doctors, nutritionists, psychologists even. So it probably becomes more your role to guide and help probably the head coach or the person who wants the best outcomes for the team, and or the individual as well, by the way. So just the head coach in general. You want them to really just solely focus on the game plan, the tactics and the structures, and then you take full responsibility of the conditioning. So what you're trying to do is basically give your head coach the team that is prepared to run the tactical game.
Yep.
And that needs to be a to and fro. So you need to have really good communication with your head coach in regards to what they want, and then how you're going to implement your plan based on what they want. I think that's really critical, and if you can get that working relationship going, that works really smoothly. Then the same thing is you have to be able to converse with your medical staff. So when you have injured players, because you need to then be able to communicate with the player itself, the medical officer, and then relay that information to the coach. So it's super important that everyone is exactly on the same page. As soon as there's a broken link between anything, it just breaks down big time, and then it's a big mess. So that's really important. Communication is usually obviously key to most things, but in this role it's imperative.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to last very long unless you communicate really well, and I might normally encourage over communicating as opposed to under communicating in that position. And then obviously one of the most important ones is how you manage your players or your athletes that you're working with. And again, depending on whether it's just the individual athlete or whether it's a full team spectrum, like you're in control, you're in charge of their performance and what they do, which will also include their sport specific stuff as well. Sorry. You do need to have a good understanding of what they are doing in their sport specific training. You might not necessarily have full control of what happens, but you can have a very strong awareness of what's going on. Because at the end of the day, like as much as strength and conditioning coaches want to think they're important, we're supplemental, like we are.
Yeah.
We've played sport for decades without us, without sports science, and it was pretty good to a degree. So I think we overstep the mark sometimes and try and get a little bit too involved in what's going on. But I mean, if we didn't exist, sport would still run.
Sport would still run, yeah.
Like, we're not necessarily needed in that sense. Having said that, I think we've definitely made a big impact on the sports industry, and I think it's definitely helped it for the better. It's just sometimes I think it gets a bit too involved. We go a little bit too deep on some things. Another one is, another role that's not always spoken about from a strength and conditioning point of view is also, culture manager.
I was going to say that, mentioning that you guys kind of drive that player relationship
100%.
within a team or in an individual setting, like you're someone that a player can always come back to because you're separate, I suppose, from the sport itself. Yeah,
I think it's really important. I mean, ideally you want to be running the culture that the head coach is trying to operate on as well. And I don't think you should try and conflict the culture, with what you're trying to do either in the gym or on the running track versus what's actually going on in the team room. I think you got to try and bring it all together, and when you can do that, that's the best. But you definitely have a massive impact on culture. I don't think you should. I always kind of saw myself as probably an extension of the coaching staff as opposed to a completely separate thing, and I think that's probably the best way to operate. The strength and conditioning coach / high performance manager is kind of like the bridge between two worlds.
100%.
So you definitely need to know a fair bit about what's going on from an actual sport point of view, from a coaching point of view, and you need to know from, I guess, a medical and performance side of things as well. So I think it's a pretty big role. It's pretty important. There's a lot of skills that are involved that aren't necessarily taught at an undergraduate level. Hence why you probably need to go and do some postgraduate stuff and just even your own kind of self-education around those things. But yeah, I mean, typically, like if you look on Seek or there's a job offer, the common one's always going to be in there, know how to plan and organise, strength programming, plan and organise conditioning programming, manage, the rehab setting. Like obviously they're going to be in there, but they don't talk about all those other things.
Yeah.
And they're really probably the biggest difference. Most people that are qualified should know how to write a strength program.
You would think.
You think, and a conditioning program, and that becomes, that's not necessarily the hard part. What's the hard part with that is more the logistics of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So being able to adapt what you know as a coach to your environment.
Yeah, to limited equipment or plenty of equipment or no time versus lots of time or 10 players versus 1 versus 30.
That's where you've got to be very careful as a strength and conditioning coach not to judge other strength and conditioning coaches, which is silly because it's a very small industry, so we should be trying to support and lift each other up. But it's important to not judge, and I'm guilty of it, I do it all the time. But I also try my best to put myself in that person's shoes and try and run their thought process around why would they be doing it this way? And it's probably because they're severely under-resourced or the potentially, the higher order, which will be the head coach or the operations manager or even the board sometimes. Like people that don't really know what they're doing can still override you. So it's an interesting role where I found I probably had a lot of autonomy being in that position, and I didn't feel necessarily outranked, but there were obviously definitely times where you just got to pull your head in and just do what
toe the party lines.
What the head coach and what the operations manager kind of want to do, and that's fine. You just got to understand that. But for the most part, once you've built that trust, it's pretty autonomous, and they'll generally leave you to do what you need to do from your end. From an individual athlete point of view, so if you're in the private sector, I think it's pretty similar. The carryover is pretty similar. You just want to create that same experience, but for the individual. And again, if that individual has coaches, or they obviously from a team that you might not be working with, it's really important for you as a coach to understand where they're coming from. Again, we're supplemental, so whatever we do should be helping, not hindering.
And almost that trust piece becomes more important. Obviously it's important in a team setting, but when you're working with an individual who goes somewhere else, they have to trust you.
Correct.
They have to also be able to trust you to do the right thing by their club. So another juggling hat.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if you can get in contact with, that that individual athlete's coaches and club, that's the best way to go about it. Otherwise, you just got to be in really strong communication with each other, and just make sure you understand what's going to be required of them. And then every now and again, there's going to be some uncontrollables. The athlete might go and do something that they shouldn't have done. You just got to have that conversation with them, how it's may not be beneficial for them to do things like that. Sometimes they just at amateur level, if you go down, unfortunately it's just an education piece. The coaches don't necessarily know what they're doing, and they're just trying their best, and they just want their team to be fitter, and they just go and do, we used to do this in the 80s.
Yeah, we'll just flog people, run laps all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly. So the intentions are really, they're there, but as a coach, you might not be able to control those things, but you can help your athlete, I guess, through those situations, or modify or work around those situations, or sometimes you just have to modify what you're going to do with them that day, knowing that they might go and get belted that night or something like that.
Which makes it very difficult. So from that, what would you say the 3 key things for anybody that is an S&C or doesn't understand S&C? 3 main messages that you
3 main messages for anyone who doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
Alright. There's obviously your technical side of things. So you do need to have a good comprehension of, I think obviously what you're going to do from a movement perspective, so with your strength training and your conditioning training as well, but you need to be able to tie that into the demands of the sport. So that's almost one thing in itself. So knowing what the sport, what's required in the sport, and that's pretty multifactorial. There's a lot going on there. So you need to look at what's going on in the sport and then know how you're going to apply that in the gym setting to improve that athlete. So I'd probably say that's one. Two, so that's the technical side of things. The second thing for me would be the actual coaching side of things. And again, I think from an undergraduate point of view, the technical side of things are probably, well, it's probably all focused on that, to be honest. And you kind of come out of that undergraduate not having any of those coaching skills, which is, yeah, I think probably something that we could change from an undergraduate point of view, because it's a 50-50 in my perspective. Like, you need to have a strong technical base, but you need to have a strong coaching base. And you could arguably, you could even say, yeah, you could probably have a good coach that doesn't know as much technically versus a really technically proficient, professional that's a poor coach. Like, I tend to find that the coach probably does a better job in the long run for that athlete. So, and again, when I'm talking about coaching in that sense, I think it goes beyond just the coaching of an exercise. It's, how can you provide support to that athlete? How can you encourage that athlete? How can you motivate that athlete? How can you build trust? All those kinds of things. How can you help that athlete almost be like a better all-round person? How can you make them more resilient? It's probably more that from a coaching perspective.